You see, I'm sorry, but I just find that unbelievably offensive, and I'm not even Jewish. It sounds to me, Dan, like you do actually hate Jewish people.
No, I believe that Jewish supremacy is the greatest threat to the world today.
Right? Do you accept, Dan, that you are just blatantly anti-Semitic?
Look, I have an issue with that term. I mean, I think the real Semites are the Palestinians.
You are just a brazen anti-Semite, aren't you? I'm honestly gobsmacked, world. That is the purest personification of anti-Semitism right there. You sound like a Nazi. I mean, you've literally spent the last 20 minutes on an anti-Semitic rant that makes Kanye look like a choir boy. But do you hate Jewish people?
No, I don't. Well, I don't like what they've done. I don't like what their religion preaches. I don't like what's going on in Israel. I don't like their influence over our government.
I'm honestly gobsmacked. You sound like a Nazi.
What was shocking to me about this interview is how Piers Morgan does not engage with Dan Bilzerian's points at all. He just keeps labeling Dan an anti-Semite. This is extremely hypocritical of Piers Morgan, especially when we see how Piers Morgan engages with other guests on the topic of Islam and Muslims and Palestinians.
And that's the problem, is you can say whatever you want against Muslims. You can be, super anti-Muslim. You can talk about them and nobody cares. But if you say anything about Jewish people, you get canceled. They, look what they did to Kanye. I mean, so why are they such a protected class? Let me ask you that.
What Dan is pointing out is that there is a double standard. When Dan is making a critique of the Jewish religion and the behavior of Jewish individuals, he's getting called an anti-Semite. But when his guests are criticizing Islam as a religion and criticizing Muslims as a people and painting Muslims with a broad brush, calling them terrorists, calling them child killers, Piers Morgan doesn't have any kind of harsh words anywhere close to what he has been saying against Dan Bilzerian in this interview.
That is the purest personification of anti-Semitism right there.
Well, when you have a religion that promotes supremacy, when you have a religion that says that you are better than other people, and when you have a religion that says it's okay to steal from other people as long as they're not Jewish, when you have a religion that says it's okay to rape people that aren't Jewish, when you have a religion that talks about having sex with, kids that are under 3 years old, when you have a religion that promotes these things and promotes supremacy, I think you're going to have problems. And you see that in Israel. Israel is a manifestation of that religion. I don't believe in white supremacy. I don't believe in Jewish supremacy. I don't believe in supremacy at all. And right now, I think you have massive Jewish supremacy.
You sound like a Nazi.
Look at how Piers Morgan reacts when he has guests ranting and raving against Muslims.
So you tweeted on Friday something that many people found incendiary. You said, never trust anyone who identifies as a Muslim. They may appear as a harmless sheep when they are alone, but when they're in a pack, they will begin to show their tusks. I have zero respect for any individual who identifies as a Muslim, and I may consider the use of force when it comes to Islamists. What did you mean by that? Many people have said, well, why would you say that about, over 1 billion people?
So notice that his guest is tweeting, not only smearing all Muslims in the world as terrorists, he's invoking violence. He's inciting violence against Muslims.
I have no respect for this people. The majority of the Muslim people identified with Hamas, supported Hamas. Show me how many Muslims out there who condemned Hamas genocide. Why? Is it because Jewish blood? This is what I meant. That the Muslims, as long as they give Hamas cover, I have no respect for them. As long as I identify as Muslims, I have no respect for them.
But I've interviewed a number of Muslims on this show who do not support Hamas and have renounced them. Cenk himself came on the show before and immediately denounced what Hamas did on October 7th.
I am dealing with a majority of Muslim countries, governments, an entire nation. Don't tell me about an individual here or there. We're talking about a majority of Muslim people.
Well, I'm talking about. Well, I'm only saying that because
who fail to take their moral responsibility.
Understand,
they
but
fail to take their moral responsibility because it's Jewish people.
I understand, but you did say literally every Muslim. You said don't trust anyone who identifies as a Muslim. That's all of them. And what I'm saying to you is,
So Piers Morgan has no problem if he smears the majority, as long as he acknowledges that there are 1 or 2 okay Muslims who aren't terrorists. This is the very low bar that Piers Morgan has for this ranting guest.
This is the time to take moral responsibility. What's the point of identifying as a Muslim while people threatening to erase an entire Jewish community. This is not acceptable. This is why I want the Muslim to stand and be clear.
Okay.
Up to this point, I haven't seen the Muslims taking a moral stand. As long as they fail their moral responsibility, I have no respect for them.
Okay. You made your point very firmly there. We're bringing Avram.
So Piers just, oh, well, you made your point very firmly there. That's all that Piers has to say to this raving lunatic who is smearing all Muslims in this way and making claims like these Muslims, they want to kill everyone. These Muslims, they want to wipe out an entire people. This is the claim that he's making. Piers doesn't say, oh, you're engaging in conspiracy theory. This is not the way that you should describe Muslims. That is bigoted and xenophobic. He has nothing to say about that. Imagine if someone had said, or Dan had said, that the Jews want to wipe everyone out, or the Jews are inherently immoral, the Jews are bloodthirsty. Imagine if Dan had said something like that to Piers Morgan. But you have this crazed lunatic making those kinds of claims about Muslims, and Piers Morgan just says, oh, well, yes, you've made your point very strongly. Is this a joke? Then what's funny is that Piers Morgan was so proud of this clip on his show that he plays it for Sam Harris. Sam Harris, as you know, is the neocon Jewish atheist, and look at how he responds.
What was interesting about that is that he was really suggesting that the motivating factor behind what Hamas did and why people are supporting them in such big numbers in the Muslim community is because they're Muslims. It's religion-driven. Now, you're an atheist, but what do you think of that, of this idea that it's actually really about religion?
Well, I'm going to agree with him. I think what I'm going to say is it should just be obvious to everyone, which is that we have a vast number of people in the Muslim community worldwide, not just in the occupied territories or in Gaza, who are powerfully deranged by religious symbols and their religious identity, which is to say it is the most important thing to them, but more important even than the deaths of their own children, right? We're talking about a culture, again, I'm not talking about just Palestinians, I'm talking about the Muslim community worldwide in dozens of countries that has produced a seemingly unending supply of suicide bombers over the last 50 years, right? We're talking about societies where phenomenon that should be impossible are simply to be expected. I mean, literally, like.
So it's expected that Muslims are suicide bombers. It's not just Palestinians. We're talking about the majority of Muslims worldwide. This is what Sam Harris is saying, that we're all terrorists, basically.
Simply to be expected. I mean, literally, like rigging children to explode. Just that, I mean, think of how deranging that is for an army or a police force or an NGO or anyone to have to imagine that a child isn't simply a child, but a child might, in fact, under certain circumstances, be a bomb.
Which Muslim is rigging up his or her child to be a bomb? This is complete nonsense that Sam Harris is inventing from the dark corners of his perverse imagination. What Muslims have been sending little children as bombs? It is the Israeli state that has been bombing children using 2,000-pound bombs on apartment buildings that we've seen over the past year, just eviscerating, incinerating Palestinian women and children. That's what the Israeli state is doing. What kind of suicide bombing children are you talking about, Sam Harris? And why isn't Piers calling this out as a deranged anti-Muslim conspiracy theory? He has nothing to say to this Zionist Sam Harris.
Some level has simply accepted that there is a different standard held to the Muslim community, right? We all understand that you can stage.
How rich. The Muslim community is held to a different standard, yet he is able to spout this conspiracy theory nonsense on Piers Morgan on one of the biggest platforms in the world, and the host is not saying one thing against him, fact-checking him or holding him accountable. Meanwhile, Dan Bilzerian says relatively mild things about the Jewish religion and the state of Israel, and he can't get in a word edgewise between Piers Morgan calling him a Nazi and an anti-Semite.
A play making fun of Mormonism on Broadway, and it can become the biggest musical in the United States, the Book of Mormon. But to stage such a play about Islam would be unthinkable, and to be unthinkable not.
What about a play about Judaism? Would that be thinkable? Where are the plays about Judaism where non-Jews are allowed to mock the Jewish religion? You have plenty of material, again, on the mainstream. People like Sacha Baron Cohen, he is constantly lampooning Muslims, caricaturing Muslims in the most derogatory way. He is celebrated on mainstream media. His videos are allowed to be spread far and wide. And people laugh about that. Where is the counterpart when it comes to mocking Jews and Judaism? Where are the caricatures of Jews and Jews? That's not allowed, right? Because that's anti-Semitism. It's anti-Semitism because you have a different standard for Muslims versus Jews.
Because the First Amendment doesn't protect the freedom of speech with respect to Islam, it does. But that protection has been forfeited. It was forfeited long ago because of the tendency in the Muslim community to erupt with just psychopathic rage in response to what it perceives to be the desecration of religious symbols. And
so you can insult Islam, and that's considered free speech according to Sam Harris. But if you criticize Judaism, that is anti-Semitism. That is something that has to be banned. And the government is now in the United States implementing laws to ban these forms of quote unquote anti-Semitism. If you go to Europe, if you go to the UK, they've already banned any kind of insult of Jewish religious symbols because that is anti-Semitic. It's not allowed. But you can insult Islam. You can burn the Quran. You can make cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. This is all allowed according to the laws of the West. But there's one exception, one religion that you can't mock. And it's not Mormonism, and it's not Islam, it's not Christianity. It's Sam Harris's religion.
Could you flip the argument the other way too? Some people would say that the scale, the disproportionate, as many see it, scale of Israel's response is motivated in some part, again, by a religious motivation, that some of the more hardline, ultra-religious members of Netanyahu's cabinet really do want to have some kind of genocidal war with the Muslim Palestinians. I mean, does it work both ways?
Well, it does work both ways when you're talking about a tiny minority of Jews in Israel. I mean, the ultra-Orthodox, the settlers the minority of settlers who are motivated by their religious fanaticism.
He's portraying it as if it's a fringe minority, but we've already seen that the majority of Jews in Israel want to have a Jewish preference in the state law, and the majority want to see Arabs expelled. That doesn't sound like a fringe. And you even have figures like Ben Shapiro, who will claim that the settlements are amazing. They love the settlements. So is Ben Shapiro some kind of fringe extremist?
This is the issue. We're dealing with a suicidal death cult that doesn't care about its own civilian casualties. In fact, its own civilian casualties are an additional advantage for it.
Yeah, Piers Morgan says, right. He just nods his head. This Sam Harris is describing Islam as a suicidal death cult. They really believe he's taking religious doctrines within Islam, and he's saying that those religious doctrines create terrorism. But we cannot look at Judaism, and we cannot look at Deuteronomy, we can't look at 1 Samuel, we can't look at the Talmud and say, well, these religious teachings are creating supremacy. These religious teachings are creating a genocide and war crimes that we've seen for the past year. That will be anti-Semitism. That's not allowed, but Sam Harris can make all of these inflammatory claims about Islam.
Sam Harris, great to talk to you again. I really appreciate you coming on.
Great to talk to you, Sam. I really appreciate it. That's how Piers Morgan treats his anti-Muslim guests. Okay, so we have this psycho again.
He's the perfect example of a Palestinian, by the way. Cenk, just right there. Because Palestinian is not limited to Gaza. Palestinian is a syndrome. It's a mental illness. It's a universal phenomenon. And Cenk is the perfect example. And if he gets hungry eventually, I will not be surprised that he will eat his own children.
Wow. So he is calling being Palestinian as a mental disease, a mental syndrome. The irony of this nutcase saying that. And then he's saying that Cenk, who, by the way, is not Palestinian, but he has the Palestinian universal hive mind, will eat his own children if he's hungry. This is the level of xenophobia and bigotry that is being spewed on Piers Morgan. And this is a repeat guest. I don't know how many times Piers keeps bringing back this nutcase to spew this garbage. And what is Piers doing? He's just silently listening, not interrupting, not calling him a bigot or a xenophobe, shutting him down.
Okay, or Cheng, your response.
Oh, okay, Cenk, he has some valid points. You have a response? Look at the double standard.
You said before that Islam, or fundamentalist Islam, is one of the great threats.
I think fundamentalist...
Being an Islamophobe, are you? Or would you be taking the same view of the Christians back in the 16th century?
I'm not an Islamophobe. What I am a phobic about is clitoridectomy, of throwing gay people off buildings, banning dancing and music and having fun generally. I'm phobic about all those sorts of things, but that's different from being Islamophobe. Muslims are the biggest victim of Islamism.
Yes, they are.
Yes, they are. So imagine if Dan Bilzerian has said that. Well, the Jews are the biggest victims of Jewish supremacy. Imagine. And then Piers says, yes, they are. To really appreciate the hypocrisy of Piers Morgan, look at one of his most popular guests, the bigot, xenophobe, Muslim hater, Douglas Murray. This is how Douglas Murray talks about immigration to the UK.
The soul of England, the soul of Britain, is about to be trampled on very, very visibly by people who are gleeful in their trampling. And they have defaced and defiled all of our holy places. And I know that the British soul is awakening and stirring with rage at what these people are doing. These people came into our house. Many of them broke into our house illegally. Many of them were never wanted here. And they have come here, they have betrayed all of our attempts at hospitality, they've spat in our faces, and now they want to trample everything we have underfoot. No.
Look at this unhinged rant by this bigot talking about the awakening spirit. He's implying a violent uprising to go and exterminate the immigrants.
Less Islam in general is obviously a good thing,
Really?
because the Islamic world...
Less Judaism in the world is obviously a good thing. Imagine if Dan Bilzerian had said something like that.
Let me finish. The Islamic world is in the middle of a very serious problem, and it has been going on since the beginnings. And
The Jewish world is in the midst of a very serious problem, and it's been going on from the beginning. What if Dan Bilzerian had said that?
I think that it is not worth continuing to risk our own security.
It's not worth risking our security for these Jews. Imagine if Dan Bilzerian has said that. That's what Douglas Murray wants to spew about Muslims nonstop, but he's an honored guest when it comes to Piers Morgan. If you go to Piers Morgan's channel, you see that Douglas Murray is constantly being interviewed and being invited to talk with Piers Morgan.
I did not want to be in a society in Britain where we have jihadists living in our midst, where we have terrorists that we welcome in, where we give every advantage to people who hate us, or at the very least do not like us. I never wanted that to be the case. I'm extremely sad that it is the case. I'd love to see it turned around. I know how it could happen. I have very low belief that we have anyone in charge in Britain who knows what to do about this. But it's a problem they've brought on our society, and I profoundly wish that they had not.
We've run out of time. Douglas, I could talk to you for hours.
Oh, I could talk to you for hours, Douglas. You just went on a rant against immigrants saying that they're destroying society and you want a solution, a final solution perhaps, for these Muslim immigrants. And Piers Morgan is just, very subtly nodding his head in agreement. He doesn't accuse Douglas Murray of being obsessed with Muslims. He doesn't ask Douglas Murray, do you really hate all Muslims? He doesn't call Douglas Murray a raving bigot, xenophobe. He doesn't have these kinds of adjectives to describe Douglas Murray. That's only saved for people like Dan Bilzerian, who criticize another religious group. Piers Morgan loves Douglas Murray so much that he has him guest hosting his show. Look at how Piers Morgan interrogates a Muslim imam.
Do you believe in equal rights for gay people?
I believe that actually the Islamic standard of law should be the standard of law in the country. Obviously, that's the standard I believe in.
So the context of this whole interview was a discussion on Israel and Palestine. Piers Morgan takes the conversation in an entirely different direction and starts grilling the imam on what Islam has to say about LGBT and homosexuality. Has he done anything like this for his Zionist guests? Does the conversation take a turn towards discussing Leviticus 20:13 in the Hebrew Bible? Is there any discussion in the verses or the passages within the Talmud about the execution of homosexuals? Does he mention anything to his Zionist guests or interrogate them about the stabbings and the pride parades in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv? Does Piers Morgan bring up with his Zionist guests the fact that gay marriage is illegal within Israel? Do these topics come up in any of the interviews that Piers has done with dozens and dozens of Zionist guests? Piers discredits his Muslim guests who are pro-Palestinian by asking these in-depth religious questions. Why doesn't he allow any kind of interrogation of Jewish beliefs in order to discredit their Zionist ideology?
Why do so many women become Muslim these days? Why do
Because they
so
want to
many
be
women in the
oppressed.
West?
Is that what you're going to tell me?
No. Why do so many
Because they want to be oppressed.
women in the world become Muslim these days?
That's the only reason someone would want to become a Muslim as a female, is to be oppressed. So not only does Piers Morgan allow his guests to spew the most vile, vicious, anti-Muslim screeds without any pushback, without any type of interrogation, but he himself is engaged in an anti-Muslim screed. Nothing that Dan Bilzerian said about Judaism or Jews reaches anything close to even what Piers Morgan has spewed against Muslims and Islam. If Piers Morgan, you want to be fair, how about you invite me on to talk about Judaism? And you can bring an expert on Judaism to debate me on which religion is more violent, Islam or Judaism. Which religion has more sanction for terrorism, Islam or Judaism? Which religion is more intolerant, Islam or Judaism? Which religion is supremacist, Islam or Judaism? I'll be happy to have a debate with a respected Jewish scholar or rabbi on your program, and you can prove to your audience that you don't have this double standard. Prove me wrong, Piers. This is a challenge to you.
I'm honestly gobsmacked.